What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another Real Talk Wednesday. We are going to be joined with Bob, kind of going in continuation with our little mini series about like elevating and overcoming. And today we're going to be essentially kind of talking about troubleshooting coach client communication to make sure that we are communicating effectively and also listening effectively. So he is joining a bunch of hoops because we all know that Instagram likes to play games and toy with us. Yo, what's going on, girl? Yo, what's going on? Oh, you are decked out in peach pink. I
Uh,
love it. Is it for the?
yeah, you know it. You know it. And by the way, it's on the way to your house, so can't beat it.
You guys, Bob is such a fucking amazing friend. Not only does he send me books to like help me be not a piece of shit, but then he also sends me drugs in the form of like liquid energy. Like
Oh man.
amazing.
Wow. Send me drugs. It
He
sounds
is
like
Bob is my drug dealer, guys. He's my
it's like you get those little white baggies in the mail. It's like, take
oh,
this. You don't even know what the hell it is.
just snorting it to high hell.
I got some stories about that, but I can't say it on an IG live because it would probably be pretty damn bad. So we'll
That's
save that.
right.
We'll
I'm
save that for a
sure.
rainy day.
I'm sure. You having a good Wednesday so far?
Yeah. It's been a busy week. Like I'm taking a 4-day business analytic class for work, and then I take a second one in September to get a certificate for it. So like I applied for a lot of analytic positions with working at Erie Insurance here. So it's great they pay for it and everything like that, but it's a lot of information. So luckily last day's tomorrow's, so that'll be good. So I'm looking forward to
Good.
it.
Yeah. I mean, those continuing education conferences are always like, they're great in terms of just like building that leadership and building like your skills and stuff, but they can also still be so draining because not only are you learning, but you're also networking. And we just know that like when you extend that portion of yourself, that like, although it's great to do, it's still at the end of the day, you're just like, you just kind of want to like hunker in.
Yeah, and when you work from home too, like my bedroom's like 5 steps down there. Like it's like you close your laptop, you're still at work, but you're not at work. It's like, but you know that feeling because you work from home. So it's like, hey, I'm working with clients all day, still here. But
I
that's
do.
that's why you go outside and take your walks and be proactive about taking care of your mental health, which is essential with being a work at home kind of situation. So.
Yeah, it honestly is. And like I know we'll talk about boundary setting probably in another installment, but
Mhm.
keeping my boundaries and keeping with my coach client communication, which is what we're talking about today.
Yep.
But my office is my office. And so when 7 o'clock comes around, both my phone and my laptop stay here in my office. And when I'm back in the bedroom with Eric, I have no phone, no laptop. Like my bedroom is my time with my husband, and he can be on his phone, he can be on his computer playing video games, but I want to be present with him
Yeah.
and love on him and improve our marriage and talk with him, not be on my phone because like whatever my clients need from me, that can wait till tomorrow.
Mhm. Yeah, that irks me so much. Like just with any relationships, man. How many times do you go out to dinner and half the time you just see people on tables on their phones? It's just like, why are you even here?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, Eric and I were guilty of that, and like we'll catch ourselves being like, it's one thing if we're like wanting to show the other person something that like we thought was funny or we want to like have an open discussion about, but it's another thing to be somewhere else entirely because you're in a world of your phone, and that's something where it's like you got to have that self awareness to catch yourself so that way you can stop because a lot of the times when you have communication issues, it's because you're either not on the same page or you're both not present. And, that's something that even holds true on the online presence because it's like you might be receiving a check in or trying to communicate with your coach, and maybe you're just distracted. So you don't do a good job being present with your communication.
Mhm.
And then therefore you don't communicate effectively. So then your coach is kind of like trying to decipher or read between the lines, or maybe just misreads the context entirely just because you weren't present in detail when you should have been.
How many times have you been guilty of doing that?
A lot earlier on when I was
Mhm.
younger in coaching, just because my check-in process wasn't where it needed to be in terms of being observant versus now it's like I get some clients don't like email communication, but I post my emails or at least snippets of them. It's not one line, no changes, good job. It is reflective, it is thorough.
Hmm.
That is not happening with like fat thumbs here. It is coming with me sitting on my fucking ass typing, because that forces me to be present, not off in the grocery store checkout line, not off on a date with Eric. Like, no, anytime I'm doing a client check in, I am sitting on my laptop, I'm reading through what they took time out of their day to
Hmm.
reflect upon their entire week, and I am giving them, you know, let's say 20, 30 minutes of a thorough check-in response to make sure that I am not missing over anything and that they are heard. But you better believe earlier on, especially when I just did like mindless voice memos where it was like, hey, good week, like it wasn't where it should have been. But it takes time to build up that skill as a coach, and time to build up that confidence, and time to even refine your check-in process so you can be fully present.
Yeah, and I think that's the number one thing that when it comes to communication, I think with any coach, the, this is like the golden context is ask the right questions. And I think that's where a lot of people fall short is when you're trying to communicate with someone, if you don't ask the right questions, we can't actually gather the right information. And when it comes to trying to help you achieve a goal, if we don't have that context, we're basically just shooting ourselves in the
Right.
foot. And I wrote down some things that I think are very important when it comes to client and coach communication that I see is an issue. And you can even see it if you scroll through social media a lot, is just a lack of
Yep.
clarity. And I think, this is why, before I even get into this, how many times have you refined your check in and your onboarding process?
So initially in the beginning, quite frequently, but lately I've been so efficient and I have such good relationships with my clients that it hasn't changed in such a long time.
Yep.
The only time I change it is when I'm onboarding a new client, and like to take you through my onboarding process, let's say you inquire with me. What I do is right out the gates, we set up a time to chat, 15, 20, maybe even 30 minutes to get to know one another. Then after that, I will send you my intake form, my questionnaire to like, so you can see my detail when it comes to building out your custom programming. And I will send you like 15 clients that are happy to communicate via email, via Instagram, texting, or even a phone call, so you can hear what it's like from them to work with me.
Nice.
It is full transparency, all cards on the table, because I'm not trying to hide anything from you.
Yep.
I'm trying to like instill trust and a baseline level of respect, because that's the only thing that this thing's going to get off the ground. And then from there, like, yes, I have standard questions that every single client should answer. But then there are some questions in my coaching question bank, if you will, that I'm going to have to detail toward a specific client. For example, a new postpartum mom I'm working with. I'm asking her about her breast milk production because, as you know, that's another biofeedback sign for stress.
Yep.
But I'm not going to ask a dude, hey, how's your menstrual cycle or how's your breast milk production? Like I could, but I'd be fucking dumb for doing that. So
Oh,
it's like it
wow.
comes down to being aware as a coach, and
Mhm.
also creating that baseline level of trust and open communication with your client so they give you the right information for your check-in questions. But to answer your question, it really hasn't changed in about 2 or 3 years, just because I'm happy with my setup and I'm getting good feedback from my clients
Mhm.
that I don't want to change what isn't broken.
Yep. And that's the whole premise of biofeedback is understanding that, right? And I think as anyone that watches this or wants to go into the coaching realm, you're gonna have a lot of periods where you're gonna have to overhaul what you do,
Mhm.
right? You're gonna have to see what works, what doesn't work, listen to your clients, find that happy medium. And I think the biggest thing that's made me very successful with the whole coaching thing is putting myself in the client's shoes,
Mhm.
right? Think about the feedback you give them, put yourself in that shoe, and if you were to take that feedback and implement it yourself, what does that look like in real time? Because I think sometimes we do come to conclusions and we don't actually understand how the end client comprehends
Yep.
it. And this is where you can get that resistance, which is very hard to overcome as a coach. Poor active listening, infrequent feedback, things like that that you can get when you actually send out a response can cause a lot of issues with communication. And look, communication isn't something that we just take in a coaching world. This is a universal
Yep.
skill, right? You put this in your workplace, you put this in your relationships, your social skills, anything like that. If you can master communication, you can do anything in your life with ease. And I think the more that you actually diverse into that, And before we do wrap up, I actually have some good books over here on communication. So if you haven't read them, I definitely want to toss them your
Hell
way.
yeah, I love
Mhm.
it. I will say a big thing that was paramount for my success as a coach, and it goes back to reflecting upon the perception of the athlete and the perception of the
Hmm.
client. The way I used to coach was solely based on Excel, where it was practically fucking data
Yep.
entry. You typed out your macros every single day, what you hit, your body weight, your blood glucose. Did you shit that morning? Did you train that day? Did you have any deviations? How many hours did you sleep? What type was your poop? Like yeses and nos, numbers, data, very, very little actual communication. It was just yes, no numbers.
Hmm.
Hardly any like, how do you feel? And I thought that was really the only way to coach because that's how I was coached. And so it was just passing down the gauntlet essentially. And when I was through my burnout phase and I was so fucking sick of being coached that way and figured that like if this is what coaching is, fuck it. I didn't realize there was another way to coach until I learned. And now my Excel spreadsheet is like your body weight, your blood glucose, resting heart rate, and blood pressure if we choose to track it.
Yep.
And maybe your steps and cardio output just as an accountability tracker. But everything else from the client's end, I want to see typed out written words because what you tell me or what you don't tell me, I will pick up on. And that communication has made me such a better coach because I am very much more aware. I am much more perceptive. I can see the athlete and their entirety. And it helps to complete the picture because it doesn't mean jack shit to see a 3 pound weight jump from Saturday to Sunday if I don't know what happened in
Yep.
between those days from the client's point of view without them communicating. And that perception has made me so much better as a coach to the point, Bob, I shit you not, I will know when one of my female clients is pregnant before they do. And and 90% of the time when I say no, 99% of the time when I suggest a pregnancy test, guess what comes back
Yep.
positive? That is the level of detail that I have been able to grow for each and one of my athletes because of the fact that I've been able to refine my communication process for efficiency in team bonding on both the client's end and my end.
Yep. Yeah, and that's very important too. And it's funny you bring up that thing about the pregnancy test, right? I remember the one time I was working with a girl and she was just like, I feel like a lot of things off. And I'm just looking at the blood work and I'm like, you realize you have ovarian failure. She's like, what
Yep,
do you mean? She's like, I'm like, look at your FSH and LH levels. Like, there's a lot of
yep,
problems here. And she's like, I didn't think that was a problem. I go, did you ever talk to anyone about this? No. And I was like, you probably should, because
yep.
you're in a world of hurt right now, and it's not looking too pretty. But yeah,
Right.
yeah, it's crazy because like the amount of knowledge, and I'm sure you can relate to this with the amount of time you devoted to mentorship and really diving in and working with Austin and some of the other coaches out there. That goes leaps and bounds.
Yeah,
Taking those classes, doing the research, digging into the books, and actually understanding that knowledge. It's incredible what you can learn when you actually understand the human body and how you can relate that to your services. And
absolutely.
again, that goes back to like the stories you post on the emails and the context that's written in them. I think that's very important because you're not just getting a one-line response. You're actually getting a detailed and customized response for the services you pay for. Because let's be real, the investment for an online coach nowadays, it's not cheap.
It's not, and I know my coaching prices are expensive. I'm fully
Mhm.
well aware, and they are worth every penny because of the level of detail and service you were provided. And with that is built in education on my end. Because as a coach, if I'm stagnant, no one wins. I get worse as a coach, the clients get worse results. It's just as important to be an educator and a leader as it is to be a student, right? And my coaching prices do reflect that. And I fully understand that when a client does sign on with me, the level of trust that is built in on their end initially, which means I did a good job nurturing that client with my social media presence and how I communicate as a leader and as an educator. Because while yes, my marketing might not be necessarily the most professionalism in terms of like graphic design, I own that. I use Canva. And
Mhm.
yeah, I pay for Canva Pro, but it's still Canva quality. But hopefully what gets through is the level of care and
Yep.
attention and detail that comes across because that's authentic.
Mhm.
Like that is real. That is Ash Markham guaranteed.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a key thing with coaching and communication is empathy.
Mm.
I don't think people understand this enough. It's just you have to really care for the
Yeah.
client and understand that we're here to see and remove timelines from what they want to accomplish, because that's probably one of the biggest problems is people have is they want to do something in 3 months and they get very frustrated, and that's where resistance comes in. You might see a lack of accountability and feedback from the client because they're trying to push a pace that isn't,
Yeah.
attainable. And with that, there's unclear expectations on how we can get from point A to point B. And for me, these are the biggest things I see with why communication fails, right? We have to establish a goal. We have to understand how long it might take to get there and realize it might take even longer, which hate to say, but depending on the context of the situation and what the client's going through, these are things that have to be talked about on day one. And then, like you said, there's a lot of people that have a lot of stress in their lives, a lot of mental breakdown, a lot of fear, indecision, doubt, and you have to really empathize with them. And I'm sure a lot of your clients that are in those situations do get therapy. And look, we talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
And if you can't take care of your mental health, it doesn't matter what goal you're trying to accomplish or how you're trying to communicate, there is going to be a lot of smoke and mirrors. So, from a communication standpoint, there's a lot of things that we have to do as an internal human to make sure that we can fortify, our standard of living and quality of life in order to make sure that we can produce the results that we're looking for, and also be able to communicate that with what the coach does provide for you. So it's a very open subject with so much behind it. And I think the biggest thing is just you really have to be on the same page from day one and just be upfront, be honest. And I think the biggest thing is transparency.
It is, and then you also have to understand that since this is a relationship, that communication and trust is going to have to be built over time. Like, it's very rare that I do take on 3 month commitments. Like, you want to pay monthly, fine, but if you really want to pay in full, 6 months bare minimum, because like any relationship, it takes time to communicate, to learn the entire individual, to learn how they communicate, to learn how they understand, right? To learn how they learn. Like, when it comes to coaching, you have to have so many tools in the toolbox where, yes, they might have to have a written check in, but they're sending you training videos and you're giving them like verbal cues. They might not click. Maybe you have to send them a video. I am a shit artist, but you know what? I will get out and draw on their body to be like, this is what I want your body to
Yep.
look like. And it's terrible Picasso art, but it is something that as a coach, I need to be adaptable to fit the need of that individual. And so while yes, my coaching there is something that's going to be very common and mutual amongst like all of my clientele that I service, but how they are coached is unique and an individual for them, and that's that customization piece that is so important. But with that is so important to understand that each client that I have a relationship with, like one client that's been with me for almost 3 years, how we communicate is going to be a lot different than how I communicate that someone brand new straight out of the gates, right? It has everything to do with the fact that I've done such a good job nurturing my 3 year client. We don't need as much hand holding, right? And it might be even a little bit more shooting the shit because they have earned that friendship with me versus someone that's brand spanking new might need a little bit more hand holding. They might need a little bit of prodding to come out of their shell, and that's completely fine, but you have to understand and meet the client where they're at and build up that communication to build up that rapport, which comes with the transparency that you spoke on and making sure that the athlete feels comfortable and feels heard, because a lot of the things that we're talking about with clients, especially gen pop and even competitors for that matter, there might be some deep root shit that is holding them back, where yes, therapy might be the best thing for them at that time, but also like understanding how impactful the mind has on the physique and making sure that we are digging and picking through that issue so these self-sabotage tendencies don't hold them back from being the best that they can be, especially on that competitive stage as an athlete.
Yep. From your standpoint as a coach, what has been the biggest critique or feedback you've gotten when there has been breakdowns in communication? What have you done to address it?
So when I was earlier on, I was a total piece of shit. I'm just gonna fucking own it.
Mhm.
I saw a person that I really looked up to, and I saw how they defined success and how they got success. And rather than being like Ash Markham as she is in front of you, do you know what Kirby is? Like, do you know who Kirby is? Kirby, the little pink thing.
No. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. I know. Okay, yeah, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Kirby, yeah. So
Yeah.
Kirby, like he punches, and that's really all he
Yep.
has. But What can he do? He can absorb. I was Kirby. I took people who I looked up to and I absorbed their essence and projected. But that can only last for so long before it's like, because it's already been done before, people get bored. And I wasn't being authentic to myself, and therefore, like, it showed. And I was also depressed because I didn't feel who I truly was. So earlier on, I was way too much of a hard ass to where how I wanted to convey my passion for coaching, it was too aggressive, versus now my passion is driven, instead of anger and aggression, it's driven from passion and ferocity, which is something I spoke with Felix Norman about on Monday. And having that differentiation is important because they look one and the same, but one is very anger, and so therefore it's driven by your ego, and so any type of feedback and criticism is normally met with a fuck you, you're the
Yeah,
problem. And that was kind of how I coached, and it was very much my way, dictatorship, because I was so insecure with who I was as a human being, let alone as a coach. Versus now, I'm not perfect. I own that. I definitely can drop the ball on some things, but my vow isn't to be perfect. My vow is to continue to be better, both as a human being, as a coach, as a wife, as an athlete, as a friend, as, all of these other hats that I wear. And that's really important to model because as a coach, you are a leader. And so if a client does not feel like they're being serviced, if they do not feel like they're being heard, creating a space where they can speak up for themselves, but then also not letting your ego get in the way to be like, no, fuck you, you're the problem. Because at the end of the day, name calling, pointing fingers doesn't resolve shit.
no.
What resolves shit is lowering down your egos and effectively communicating as a team. And so I've cultivated a good environment where if an athlete doesn't feel like they're being serviced, or maybe I'm not doing a good job giving feedback in a way that resonates with them, I have to figure it the fuck out. And that's my job. But what my client's job is telling me the truth, respecting me and respecting themselves enough to speak up when something isn't going the way that it could be going, so that way we can fix the problem together. And that's how my coaching has evolved as I have evolved.
Yeah, and I think having those hard conversations is a very hard thing to do, for anybody, and it's not just coaching, right?
Yep.
Think relationships, right? How many times have you seen people drop the ball because there's missing context and information, or things that have happened behind each other's backs, and it's kind of like, I never knew about this. Like, what the heck, right? And I think for me, that was probably one of my biggest mistakes when I, got through coaching and started refining my onboarding process. That's why I asked that question, was because there were certain questions I was not asking, and because of it, there's context that I missed that should have been asked months prior. And without knowing that, it made me realize, why is this person have this attachment style? Why do they act the way they do? Why do they have these behaviors and habits? And how do I troubleshoot them?
Yep.
If I don't know that on day one, and I come to like month 3 or month 4 and I see a trending behavior, and I'm just like, why wasn't this talked about?
Mhm.
That's a big mistake from a coaching standpoint, right? And I think that clarity from day one, and granted, an onboarding document can be a little of information overload, and some people get easily dissuaded by it.
Oh yeah.
But that's where sometimes, before you actually send the information and people inquire about you, you might have to do some cutting back,
Oh yeah.
because you'll understand, like, hey, if I send them this full document, they're going to read it and be like, oh my God, I'm not filling this out. Like, this is crazy. But at the same time, it's important to understand that, so we can adjust it based off if they're like type A, if they're very anxious, very secure, very avoidant. These are very important context informations and keys to know in order to have those proper conversations and then get them from where they are to where they want to be. And that's goal setting 101,
Mhm.
right? You have to have all that outlined in order to be successful and check those boxes. So, for me, that was my biggest mistake. But then, going through some classes and doing some things and refining the questions I ask, and dumbing it down into layman terms so it's not over complex, but it's also very welcoming to the client. It helps them open up and provide me that information to be successful with getting them to where they want to go.
Exactly. I know sometimes filling out forms can feel a little mindless, just because of like doctor's offices. It's the same fucking
Yes.
questions. And you're like, damn it. It's like, I don't know if it's my paternal side, maternal side. Someone's got fucking cancer. It's like, we just check, 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 because you just want to fucking get through it. Like, you don't give a
Mhm.
shit. You want to communicate because it's easier to speak versus to fill out forms. And so, a big thing that I like to do is I just tell people, I want you to fill this out to your comfort level, but I also want you to fill this out when you have time to think and be thorough.
Yep.
Don't do it when you're trying to get the kids ready for school. Don't do it after a long work day where you're stressed out of your mind. You can't put two words together. You know, you fucking can't find your car keys. They're in the fucking freezer. Like, do it when you are most relaxed and you are
Oh,
wanting to invest in yourself.
wow, in the
Like,
freezer.
I mean, we've all done it. You know what I'm saying? Prepping is so real, but it
Hmm.
is so important to also like meet them where they're at, but also create the expectations that this investment's for you, and I want you to take it seriously. I want it to mean something to you, and fill it out to your comfort level. But then also, when I do follow up questions, my questions are based around enjoyment. Because one of my favorite questions on my sheet is what does a typical weekday and what does a weekend day look like? And it's usually the same shit: eat, work, meal prep, gym, maybe take the dogs on a walk, get the kids to school, maybe study if they're a student. I'm like, what do you do for fun? And they're
Yep.
like, I like cooking. I'm like, meal prep is not a fucking hobby.
Yep.
What do you do for
Mhm.
fun? And they're like, I don't know. I was like, that's a problem. Guess what we get to work on? So, again, those questions are super important, but it's not necessarily important what they tell you, it's important what they don't tell you. And again, that perception is so important on the coaching end, which is why, again, like I don't have a big roster. I'm not going to have 100 athletes because, like, you have too many athletes, you're not going to give enough attention. And I don't give a shit about having like a huge, big ass team. I care about the people that I work with, the individual members, because that creates that community, which is why, like, the athletes, the feedback that they do give me, I feel cared for. I feel I'm happy. Thank you for listening. Thank you for seeing me as a human being. That is consistent through all of my check-ins, whether it is a gen pop versus a high level competitive athlete that wants to earn their professional status. It's like you care for the individual first because that at the end line is the foundation of success. And any other hat they want to wear comes second. But if they're not a human being first, we're fucked.
Mhm. Yeah, and I love that too because the common phrase of quality over quantity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just like training, right? You could do 100 sets in a workout. Doesn't mean it's a good workout, but you could also do 10 sets and absolutely push yourself to the limit and see freaking Jesus at the end of your set. And guess what? It's gonna be an amazing workout,
That's
right?
right.
That's how you
Mm-hmm.
train, right? Exactly. So you know how it is. But no, I agree with that 100%, right? From an empathy standpoint, from quality perspective when it comes to the questions that you ask. I mean, if you don't do that, you're just really selling yourself short, and you're also kind of wasting your client's time, which
Mm-hmm.
sucks, and also their money. But
Oh,
you know, I think that all comes with trial and error from any coach. It doesn't matter how long you've been in this industry, you are going to make mistakes. You're going to have to learn from them. You're going to have to own them. But most of all, don't make them
yeah.
again. Because if you do, then, word of mouth goes a long way with the clients that you work with. And they'll be like, oh, I worked with this guy, kind of took a break, went back, nothing really changed. It's kind of like, that's not the word of mouth that you want to hear from
Right.
other people. So,
Exactly.
I'm, it can be a little tough. It can be a little tricky, but, that's where refinement comes
Mm-hmm.
in, right? Because I always tell people all the time, a good idea is like a wheelbarrow. I mean, it doesn't go anywhere unless you push it. And then that comes down to your work ethic and your standards and your expectations. You just have to create that mark if you truly want to be successful, not only with coaching, but any occupation out there, right? You have to put in the work. You have to be dedicated. You have to show grit. There's going to be some long nights. There's going to be some days where you get frustrated, but guess what? That's where you learn.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you refine your craft and become to that next level. And when you can operate at that high level, that's when success starts to truly come around. And look, it doesn't happen overnight, right? Building a clientele, understanding a good process, creating a lot of context, information, just like what we do here with social media influencing and information for people to get, right? That takes time. You got to plant that seed and water it and
Mm-hmm.
see it come to fruition. So,
Agreed. I think another big key when it comes to communication, at least on the coach's end, is not getting emotional.
mhm,
Um,
yeah.
when you get emotional, you will lose every single time. Now, that does not mean, like, when people hear that, what they might hear is, oh, my coach isn't going to get excited for my wins. No, that's not what that means. That's not what that means. Especially when it comes to conflict, if you get anger, upset, pissed off, resentful, you lose out on the ability to think logically and clearly about how to resolve the situation.
Mhm.
So before any email, I actually have literally pieces of paper. They're my little like coaching commandments by my office, right? And when I reflect on especially a difficult email, I go through my little commandments and I think about, is this person going to be receptive to my ideas, or am I too emotional because I'm upset? And I will wait until I send the check-in response, the feedback for the week, to make sure that I've communicated as a leader, to make sure that the client felt heard and that we have conflict resolution. But again, I am sad when my clients have a hard week, especially if it's something outside of their control. Even if it's within their control, my heart feels for them because I'm human too. I'm an athlete. I fuck up. I have hard weeks. When they have wins, I'm excited for them. I celebrate with them, right? But when it comes to the feedback, it is so important to be level headed so that way you have clear and concise communication and the athlete has directions leading into the next week, right? But if you are so angry to the point where you feel attacked, again, that ego comes into play, then the athlete is not going to learn. They're not going to understand. They're just going to get more pissed off. So, like, I don't know if you saw that one commercial where I feel like it was Aldi, where it was like, fussing about returns or something like that. And the woman came in wanting to pick a fight with the Aldi clerk, and she was just like, "Yeah, no problem. We take our returns back. It's no hassle free." And the woman was like, "I really wanted to fight though." And she's like, "Would you like to have a fight?" And they just start like pretend bickering. But like
Mhm.
sometimes it's so important to understand that the best way to get through a fight is to avoid it in the first place.
Yep.
And if your client is emotional, let them be emotional. But you as the leader, don't absorb it, understand where they're coming from, like you said, have that empathy, and then instead of getting emotional back at them, especially if they're attacking you as a coach for whatever reason, understand it might not necessarily be you as the coach. Maybe they had a really hard week and they're just like taking it out on someone, which is not something I recommend. It's not something I condone by any means. But regardless, you be the coach. You lead them to success. You hear them, you understand, and then you make sure that they're going to have a good week on your end. I think that's really important as a coach to, again, part of that communication aspect is to go in with a level head and lead through logic, not be berating through emotion.
Yeah, and I love the papers that you have there, right? Because on
Mhm.
my desk at work, I have what I call the three P's, is where I pause, I'm patient, and precision.
Mhm.
And that's one thing that I've really learned over the years is I can sketch up a check-in response, but at the same time, proofread it. Put yourself in their shoes, go through that motion, see what that feels like, whether it's a female, male athlete,
Mhm.
and just kind of put yourself in a day of their life. Hey,
Yep.
these are the changes I'm going to make. How is this really going to affect them? And what do I think the outcome is going to be? Because when I talk to them the next week, it could either be good or it could be bad. And then as a coach, I have to adjust to that. And I have to be able to communicate whether it's good or bad. And I know we're going to talk about this in a little bit where we talked about, what was it, communication and
Complaining.
complaining. Yes. So that's the last thing I want is for them to get a check in and then complain. And then there's resistance. And then you have to fight resistance with resistance and try and find resolution.
Hmm.
That's a very hard thing to do as a coach.
Yep.
So if you can avoid it at all costs by actually being very precise with what you say, proofread it, and actually understand what that context is in their eyes, finding that happy medium, finding the balance, and also the middle ground is what will make that communication that much better. And look, it's a tough task.
Yep.
It's going to take a lot of time, and it's why I read a lot of books on communication and attachment styles, like the Patronic one I gave you to read. Phenomenal, right? How many of those examples can you use with your clients right now and find success? Probably most of them.
Hmm.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it would be good to dive into the questions now. So the first question is, how do you know if you're complaining versus communicating with your coach? And that, at the end of the day, comes down to two things in my mind. One, intention. Like,
Mhm.
are you trying to openly complain? Are you trying to have like a pity party? Or are you trying to be a wine bag? Or are you trying to communicate? And honestly, only you can answer that. If you're asking that question, only you can answer that in your heart, right? But then two, it's also what you say. And what I mean by that is, are you presenting the problem and whining about the problem? Or are you presenting the problem and wanting to troubleshoot the situation, right? So rather than just like identifying the problem and saying, "Oh, this sucks, I'm angry," bleh, you can acknowledge that it sucks because it might very well fucking suck. I mean, we're human. It's not that you can't be emotional. It's not that you have to be a fucking perfect robot, because you're not, but you can say, like, this is difficult. I am having a hard time, but this is how I want to solve the problem. This is what I think is best for me. Your coach ultimately likely can see a better bird's eye view because they're not like emotionally involved, they're logically driven, hopefully. And so then it's like together, working together as a team. But if you're just being a wine bag, you're just wanting to be a Debbie Downer, you're wanting someone to have pity over you, like, that to me is where you're complaining. But if you're communicating to try to be proactive and resolve the conflict and be an active participant of the troubleshooting process, that to me is communication. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on it too.
Yeah, so let's actually think about what complaining and communication is, right? If we think about complaining, negativity, dissatisfaction, right? If we communicate, what are we trying to do? We're trying to problem solve, accomplish goals, understand something, and then gain resolution,
Mhm.
right? So when I do a check-in and I kind of break this down, and I already know, like, hey, some of the things I might say might come off a little harsh. It's not harsh reality, but what I do is I kind of do like break it down to like different scenarios.
Mhm.
Like, hey, we're going to do this week. This might be the outcome, or this might be the outcome. And based off that outcome, these are the things that we're really going to focus on. And this, where the complaining and the communication really comes into effect for me, is when I deep dive into someone's like stressors in their lives. Because you already know the resistance is going to happen, right? If you have a client that tells you for 6 months what is their biggest stressor in their life and it's their significant other, that's a conversation that they have to have with them in order to get to their physique goals in the future, or else it's spinning the wheel, right? So how can you streamline that communication to where it seems like you're not pointing the finger, but at the same time threading the needle to help them take that next best step, not only in their fitness journey but also in their social lives, relationships, etc. um, it's perspective. It really is. And this is why, like, I really have to go back and proofread some of the things that I write. I type extremely fast, and sometimes the thoughts that come through my head, it might not be the right
Yep.
answer. So going back and, like I said, just rereading what I write, thinking how the client is going to take it based off what I know and how I've communicated and built that relationship with them. Because, like you said, you have that 3-year client that you work with. You could probably tell me everything that they do from the time that they wake up to the time that they go to bed, the time that they shit, the time that they have lunch, the time that they drink water, God knows what else. But if you're so in tune with a client like that, that just streamlines the communication aspect and reduces the complaining aspect because you understand their attachment style.
Yep.
You understand what, if you say X, Y, or Z, what they're going to do in return.
Mhm.
And I think that's very important that you build that bond with that client right out of the gate, establish with how you can communicate properly with them. And then once you do that, you're only checking boxes from there on out.
Exactly.
And then that will help streamline the positivity and reduce the negativity in the complaining.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great answer. And that kind of goes into our next question of how do I talk to my coach when they perceive it as pushback? And that's
Mm,
tricky because it's, again, communication. That's, I was going to make a joke. It's like, unless you're schizophrenic and having a conversation only with yourself. But I mean, like, we have our own conversations with ourselves all the time. But when you're communicating with your coach, there's two people. And so you can't perceive what your coach perceives. That's on them, right? So there's
yeah.
going to be a reflection on both ends when it comes to coach client communication. But you have to reflect upon, like, are you pushing back? Are you pushing back because you are scared of letting go of control? Are you scared of the uncertainty because you've only known one way for so long?
Yes.
A lot of the times when we are afraid to change, we have such a death grip and a chokehold on our life because we feel so chaotic in every other aspect that our nutrition, our steps, our entire schedule can be so dictated by rules which have been created through fear, that any type of change or fiddling, like, it's just like a knee-jerk reaction
Yes.
where it's like, oh, I can't do this. But in reality, it's like you could be willing to change, but maybe the speed is too much right now. Like, maybe you have a great direction going where you're reducing your steps, or you're increasing your steps, or you're reducing your food, you're increasing your food, whatever the fuck dial needs to be changed for you in your unique situation. Maybe the speed is a bit too quick, and maybe that's on the coach. So again, it's rooted down into communication and what you are conveying. And it's so important to understand your tone. You can be vulnerable and say, hey, I appreciate what you're trying to do. I am scared. Can you meet me where I'm at right now? I'm willing to change, but we're going just a bit too quick. Like, I'm sure everyone's been in a relationship where how many times have you been like, hey, this is going way too fast for me? Like, you went from like first date to hitting a home run and you're like, yo, fuck, we gotta roll it back.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that happens.
Mhm.
It's easy to get excited, right? Coaches get excited too. We see a client we want to work with, we know their potential, we see their work ethic. Sometimes we get so fucking excited we piddle on the carpet and we don't even know what's going on because we allowed emotion to cloud our judgment. That happens. We're imperfect human beings. But again, it boils down to communication and understanding what is best for the longevity of the client, of the athlete. And again, that's built through time. So it is really just important to learn each other's communication styles, especially on the coach's end, to make sure the athlete feels cared for and is heard, but it's also being pushed and challenged. And there's a fine line with that, which is why Bob reflects on his emails, because his brain might be so excited going a million miles a minute that the client might not be ready to receive and hear what Bob has to say. So it's back to the drawing board, and maybe it's a 3-week process to get to the end goal that Bob really wanted in the first place. But rather than shooting straight out of the gates and putting it this week, it's let's build up to it in a sequence of steps.
Yeah, and you hit on some great buzzwords there. One being fear, right? Two other ones that I see with a lot of clients is indecision and doubt, and that causes them to basically go in that shell, like you talked
Yep.
about, right? How can you break that from day one, right? We're going to be making X, Y, and Z changes, and you can even see that with their goals. It's kind of like I want to increase or improve my relationship with food. I want to find better balance in my life. I want to be able to eat socially and not think I'm like a nuisance to someone. Or like we talked about last week with volume eating.
Mm,
How can I be social and not think about eating 13 pounds of vegetables when I go out to a buffet and actually look like a normal human who actually eats like normal food, right? That's a very hard process to do. And when you talked about dialing things back with that timeline, I'm actually working with someone right now where she's kind of like, I want to try and do this as quick as possible. I'm like, you really can't, right? I'm like, these are some things that we can change each week. And honestly, the
mm,
changes I've made over the last 8 weeks, I really haven't even touched any of our food. It's been external stressors that cause her to volume eat.
yep.
And she's never realized it because the perception and awareness is lost in the entire situation, right? Like I even told her, like, how many times have you actually ate with your kid in the last 8 weeks? None. All right, so let's have a day where you actually eat dinner with your kid to provide and show that you can do balance and flexibility. And she's just like, I can't do that. I'm like, yeah, we can. We can
Yeah.
definitely do that, right? You have to find inroads in order to make that standard and that communication. Um, one phrase that I always love to say when it comes to something like this is, "Don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind." Anyone can change. It's just how you're looking at the situation. And I think a lot of clients get so zoned in on only one way of completing something because I think information overload from social media. Hey, this influencer does it this way, or this coach does it this way. That's the only way to do it. Not really, right? There's many ways to complete any kind of a
Yep.
project. It doesn't have to be fitness related. And I think opening their mind to different situations and different outcomes allows them to see the big picture and makes it that much more clear because look, they have tunnel vision. Like they're literally their hats like this and they don't even know where the hell they're going. They have to take it off a little bit and understand, hey, I can see things differently
Yep.
if I actually open my mind to it. Um, but man, getting that across to them is such a hard conversation to have. Breaking habits from months to years to sometimes decades. And look, I'm sure you've worked with clients like that. Breaking decades of habits, mm, that's where that timeline has to go out the window and the patience has to truly be built. And that's tough.
Exactly.
Really tough. Yeah.
Exactly. No, no, great thoughts there. And then final question before we open it up to any listener
Mhm.
questions. How do I know when something is urgent that should be addressed ASAP versus waiting until the next check-in? And I really do think urgency means something. Like words mean things, right? So
Mhm. Yep.
urgency means like time-based. So what would make sense? with the fact that you're understanding the context that you're working with a health and fitness coach. Okay, as much as we pride ourselves on our education of both the physiological and the psychological, we are not doctors. We are not the emergency room. We are not 911. We are not your therapist. If it comes down to a matter of urgency, of the fact that like you need to seek medical attention, texting your coach, probably not the thing to do. Probably calling 911, going to the hospital, going to urgent care should be number one. Update us after the fact, right? Like update us once you've received medical treatment. If it's something about like suicidal thoughts and tendencies, okay, again, a 911 type of emergency, a therapist type of emergency, convene with us after it has been successfully addressed. If it's something where it's like, hey, coach, I've been like pissing out my ass the past 3 days. Yeah, honestly, personally, I would want to know about something
Yep.
like that, especially if
Yep.
I made a change. Like, let's say they checked in on Friday, we made a change. They roll around Monday morning, and like I said, they've just been having nonstop ass water. Okay, you know what? I probably want to know about that instead of them having another 4 days of ass water, right? So it comes down to, I would say, a level of urgency, but also within the context of coaching, because it's like I wouldn't want a client to be miserable for 7 days because I made a bad judgment call or I did something that their body clearly does not fucking like, right? So that is also again built up over a coach client expectation. There are some coaches that when you work with them, your check-in day is your fucking check-in day, and that's how they coach, and that is within their stipulations. My coaching is not like that. It's a little bit more, I would say, new age, open-minded, maybe a
Yes.
little bit more accessible, where
Mhm.
yes, you have your design check-in day, which is like all the biofeedback, but if I hear that you're sick, if I hear that you're not feeling well, I would like to know rather sooner rather than later so I can tell you what to do in that moment, which is
Yes.
i.e. rest. But I mean, Bob, I shit you not. I've had numerous conversations with clients where they'll send me training videos and they'll be frustrated with their performance and they're like, God, I woke up sick today. My throat hurts. I'm congested. I will literally be like, go
Yep.
home. Well, what about my shoulder? Go home.
Yep.
Like it's something where again you're just so emotional that you can't think logically, but it's like when you're sick, you're not making progress in the gym. You are only prolonging your sickness, you're making your immune system worse, and quite frankly, you're being a jackass to other patrons. But
Yes.
go home. So it is something where again, coaching styles and what coaching offer is really important within like the coach client communication dynamic and contract. But again, that's why it's so important that when you are vetting coaches, you see what their level of accessibility is. Bob may have a different level of accessibility compared to me, compared to Austin, compared to Joe Blow on the street. But regardless, it is something where you also will create based on what you truly need as a coach. Because again, when you are brand new, or if you're a type A OCD functioning person, everything might be urgent because your brain is scrambled eggs and everything is chaotic. So that again, therapy is so important in that too.
Yeah. And that's a fine line too with that open book communication, right? Because if you have a very type A person and you give them your phone number, more than likely you might get like 100 messages in a day, and it's like, man, this is exhausting,
Yeah.
right? There's a balance and a fine line that you have to establish with that communication. And
Mhm.
at the very bottom of like my onboarding, I actually have like a section
Mhm.
in regards to what we're talking about right here, so it's very clear and transparent on day one. I know for me that I'm a pretty open book like you. If a client feels that they need to text me something that's very urgent, by all means, I'll be able to get them an answer pretty quick.
Mhm.
More than likely, it'll be a check-in and maybe a follow-up throughout the week. But there's certain things that come up that are outside of our scope of practice. And look,
Yep.
if there's any kind of an injury, if there's any kind of a medical concern, hey, coach, I have to go to the ER. Like I think I did something. Okay, update me afterwards
Yeah.
so that way I know what it is and we can address a game plan. But I love the whole sick thing because I had that respiratory shit like 2 weeks ago, and then Austin got it, and I feel terrible
Mhm.
for him. But let me tell you, that shit is no joke. And if people think that they can go to the gym and train feeling like that, you are going to make everybody in that gym miserable, sick. And look, probably 5 years ago, I'd be that person that would go in there and train, but now I know better that it's kind of like, what damage am I doing not only to my immune system and myself, but everybody else in there, and also hampering my recovery. And granted, this is the first time I've been sick since 2011, knock on wood. But man, when I get sick, mm, no bueno. Yeah. Do
Exactly.
do the right thing. And I think that's so hard for some people because they're so goal oriented where it's like, I just want to get from point A to point B, but it's like it doesn't work that
Exactly.
way, right? Everything's in layers. Communications in layers. Goal setting, achieving your goals. It's layers. It's micro loading. There's so many things to it. Training, right? Training. How do you perform a squat properly, right? You can't just go in there and do it correctly day one. Like that might take years for you to perfect, and even then, you might not perfect it. You still could be learning, right? Me and you, we're still learning on proper communication styles. We're still learning with how to outline, onboarding documents, update PDFs, make manuals and things like that, how to market ourselves, right? It's an evolution. I mean, this is something that you'll never actually understand in to full because we're always learning. And the day that you're not learning, you basically shut off your actual potential from being the best version of yourself because you're like, I think I know it all.
Hmm.
The world doesn't work that way. It
Exactly.
really doesn't. But yeah, those are some good things that you touched on there. And I really think a lot of times that hard urgency question, is it really in the scope of practice of a certified personal trainer?
Hmm.
If yes, we can provide that advice. If no, more than likely we can refer you to someone who might give you that answer or provide you additional details with how to get that answer, right? Think injuries, right? There's a lot of great resources out there. People that do body work, like Matt next level that just had a surgery. He's phenomenal with body work out there. There's some great chiropractors that truly know the body. So establishing those network connections can really take you a very far place. And like the whole sick thing too. Like I have a different couple outlines that I have based off the sickness on how to help address it with a client. So if they're like, hey, I think I'm coming down with like the flu or something, I'll be like, here's some things that we can do this week. Let's just focus on rest. Let's do this, and let's see how you are come next check-in day. And then, I'll tell them like in a couple days, let me know how you're feeling, and if we need to adjust, we'll
Hmm.
adjust. And I think it's very important that get out of that mindset of hey, we just check in on Mondays. Where if there's certain situations where you do need to communicate multiple times per week, that needs to be an open door policy that you have in order to establish what is urgent and what is not urgent. So it's more of a context and perception based issue. So that's a phenomenal question, by the way.
And also, like when it comes to like constant communication, I don't mind, but you will be paying for it because you are
Mhm.
paying for my time. And so I have
Yep.
some clients that
Mhm.
do need that extra accountability with their meals or with their mobility or whatever.
Mhm.
They text me pictures, they, send me updates every single day. I don't mind, but they're paying for it. And that's the important thing is if you want that extra level of accountability and service and level of care, that's fine. There's no shame in needing that. There are some clients that will need that and thrive better because of it. But refusing to acknowledge what you need because of the fact that it's going to cost a larger investment, like again, you need to think of longevity and truly what is best for your long term level of progress and performance, whether your lifestyle, functional health, or a competitive athlete. It is really important to understand that like your needs need to line up with that level of investment so you can receive that level of care and not also be gaslit into thinking that, oh, you're a little bitch or you're needy just because you're sending your coach food pictures. Like, if you need that, fucking utilize it, but also be willing to understand that because it's an extra level of care, an extra level of service, you're going to want to pay for that as well, just out of respect for your coach and their time and the other athletes on your team.
Yeah, and I love the comment that Megan just put in the chat here. Expectations and boundaries.
Hmm.
Oh God, that relates to everything with coaching, and that's literally to a T. And like you said, you can base your pricing off different tiers and the availability that you have,
Hmm.
right? And that comes down to both of the things that Megan just said there, right? The expectation that you're going to give your client and also your personal boundaries, right? There's only so much that Ash can do in one day. There's only so much that Bob can do in
Guys,
one
there's
day.
only so much Ash can do.
Mhm. I didn't think that one through all the way, but you get what I mean, right? But man, that's so good. That is so good, and I think sometimes the client doesn't understand our role and what our daily lives look like, and that can make it a little bit of smoke and mirrors. They might just think that, oh, you're a coach, and that's all you really have to focus on, right? Sometimes it doesn't work that way, right? You have a husband, you have other commitments, you have other hobbies and things that you like to do. Yes, this is your occupation, and yes, you make time to complete those chores and tasks, but there's also time for Ashley, right? There's also that boundary that you create where there's your time, there's time with your husband, time where you totally shut off and you will not be available. And as long as you communicate that with your clients, I don't think that there's going to be any problems because they have that expectation, which comes down to what Megan said here. And that's something that I'm very upfront with my clients with as well. So they kind of know, hey, I work full time, but I also do coaching on the side as well. Sometimes there can be delays in responses, but more than likely, I will tell them if you don't have a reply in 24 hours, please follow up because I will never make someone wait that long. Like that's just not acceptable in my books.
Agreed.
Hmm.
Agreed wholeheartedly. That's all I got. Any final comments, questions, or concerns from either you or the Peanut Gallery?
Yeah, so these are the two books I was talking about, Crucial Conversations. You read this, it really helps with those hard conversations with clients. And if you want, next time I send you a box, I can send you this. It's incredible book. And then this one, John Maxwell, I've read like almost all of his books, 16 Laws of Communication,
Ooh,
breaks down bunches of different ways to actually communicate with a client in social settings, work environments. Um, Really good for clientele.
cool.
So these are really good here. But I'm a book nerd. You know that. Knowledge is power. That is something I'll always live and die by. So, the more that I can learn, the more that you can learn, the better that we can provide a service to our customers and our clients.
Word.
And at the end of the day, that's why people hire us. That's why you make an investment, and that's why you deposit your time to um, achieve your goals. So, pretty
Absolutely.
much.
Well, dude, I
Yep.
appreciate your time this evening. Guys, thank you so much for
Mhm.
watching us either live or watching the replay on Instagram or on YouTube.
Yes.
Eric and I are getting the YouTube up to make sure that these like Real Talk Wednesdays have their own little like playlist on YouTube. So that way you guys aren't having to filter through my other IG lives since I am really big into networking. But guys, thank you so much for your time this evening. Bob, keep kicking ass and taking names. And I hope the rest of your conference goes well.
Yep. We'll see you in a couple weeks, right?
All right, yep. See you in a
Oh
couple
my God,
weeks.
it's gonna be March.
I know.
Uh,
All
terrible. We'll see ya.
right, take care.